For the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
Ryan, thank you for making me feel like Lou Gehrig. Okay. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. All right. And we'll move on to item number 3, public comment. Rory Burke, what public comment do we have?
Give me one moment, because we did have some, I think.
And just as Rory's doing that, everybody got the extra email sent out today at 4 o'clock with the 2 additions for the packet?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All of the public comment that was received specifically requested that it be read during the second public comment.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll move on to item number 4. Approve the minutes of the September 15, 2020 regular meeting. Can I have a motion to do so? Motion by Anne Marie. Second by Bob. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Item number 5, first Selectmen's reports. Just 2 things. One, I want to apologize for the late notice on Tuesday for having to move the meeting. My father had some back surgery. He was in rehab, and my mother called me and said they had taken him to Bridgeport Hospital. It looked like it was a drug overdose, not by him, but by the facility itself. So he is doing better. Hopefully he'll be out in the next day or 2, go back to the rehab center, finish his rehab, and then be home in a week or so. But just wanted to apologize to everybody for the short notice on that. And then just to announce my last day, officially, and I will be writing a letter of resignation, but it will be Tuesday, October 20th at 5 p.m. That will be 2 hours prior to the next Board of Selectmen meeting. At that meeting, you guys will choose my replacement as well as fill the vacant seat that will be on the Board of Selectmen. I know that Rich and Brian had put together a legal opinion on that. So if anyone has any specific questions, you can reach out to them through Rory and get that all addressed and taken care of. So, okay, so that closes the first Selectmen's report. We'll move on to item number 6, which is discussion and take possible action regarding Union Cemetery. Union Cemetery, as you all may or may not know, is that small, older cemetery that is on Derby Avenue. It's to the point now where the cemetery feels it is unable to continue operating. They have been working with Tony Caserta to have that addressed. And Tony, in turn, has been working with Rich and Brian on this. So, Brian, if you want to give us an update, talk a little bit about the letter that you guys crafted to Tony, and then talk to the board about what potential steps we should be taking.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman. Brian LeClaire from the Town Attorney's Office. We understand that a request was made by the Union Cemetery Association for the takeover of their cemetery. They've indicated that they have approximately $44,000 being held in trust, and they would turn that over to the town if it were to assume and accept the deed for ownership of the cemetery. Right now, I believe the town contributes $1,000 annually to the cost of the cemetery, and the maintenance budget is about $7,000, according to the folks from the Cemetery Union Cemetery Association. The town is the largest plot holder in this cemetery. In the distant past, this was a potter's field. The difficulty is the members of the association have indicated they're all elderly and there is no one practically to take over this cemetery. Now, there is a statute that talks about the town taking over an abandoned cemetery, but Union Cemetery is not an abandoned cemetery under the state statute because it is being maintained. So it doesn't fit into that category. That being said, the town can, if it wants, to take over the ownership of the cemetery and the trust proceeds. 7148 of the statutes allows a municipality in Connecticut the power to hold, lease, sell, or manage real estate, absolutely or in trust, and that can include a cemetery. So if you choose, we can proceed with the acquisition of the cemetery from the association. It is not something we will do under the statute as an abandoned cemetery because it is not abandoned, but should you choose to take over the cemetery, you can do that as a municipality.
So Brian, just from, I guess, a mechanic's perspective, how would that process work? Would the town then have the responsibility of not only maintaining but managing the cemetery? Because I know not all the plots are sold. So we have the ability to continue selling plots to offset cost. And
it would, because you would be acquiring that cemetery, and we would have that all included in the town. How you manage it, how you do that is another question, but that can be done as part of it, acquiring the management of it and the unsold plots of the cemetery as well.
the 44,000 that we would receive from the Cemetery Association, would that need to be held in a special revenue account to be used only on the cemetery, or is that money that could just fall to the bottom line into the general fund?
Yeah, that's a great question. We would have to look. We were told, and the town was told that that is being held in trust. We'd have to look at the nature of the trust right now to see whether the money can be put into the general fund and the town just fund on a yearly basis the maintenance or maintain the cemetery out of its operating budget or its current public works or parks crews. Something's happened to the screen.
Yeah, Rory's sharing it. He's getting it set up for Chris.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if I lost you. So yeah, we would have to confirm that there is 44,000 in trust. We'd have to check those records, and we would also have to check the terms of that trust as well. Do some due diligence here before the town does acquire it, and to check the obligations and liabilities of this cemetery to see exactly what we are getting, what you would be getting into before you jump feet first into this. But if you do want to proceed and authorize us to inquire further, we can do exactly that to make sure the town's protected.
So essentially, that's all you're looking for at this point, is if the selectmen have interest in considering this, to kind of have you guys do all the due diligence.
Yes,
and so on.
For selectmen, that's correct.
Okay, Rob, then Chris. Go ahead, Rob.
2 questions. Does the town already have ownership of any other cemeteries? Is there any, secondly, is there any precedent? Or
Brian, I'm not aware of the town owning any other cemeteries.
I am not aware either. I know that we own plots in this cemetery. We are the largest owner, I'm told. We being the town of Seymour is the largest owner or plot holder in this cemetery already, by virtue of it being a potter's field many years ago.
Yeah, and the only other town, at least locally, that you guys would probably be aware of that owns a cemetery or manages a cemetery is Northwest, which is on Route 67 in Woodbridge. That is maintained by the town. So if you want to purchase a grave, you actually go into town hall and do that. But Brett, I guess, and then, well, Chris, let's take your question and then we'll go from there. Go ahead.
Should we decide to buy, should we decide to acquire the cemetery, is there a limitation as to how quickly we could potentially remove it from our ownership or turn it over to somebody else?
That might be the problem. I think you have a cemetery association here, which is the Union Cemetery Association, telling the town that the members are aging. They cannot continue to do this. There's no new members to assume the obligations and custodianship of that cemetery. I think the town would have the same difficulties if you tried to go and flip or turn over the cemetery. I don't know who would acquire it or who would be interested in acquiring a cemetery from the town. I mean, perhaps you can acquire other cemeteries if anyone is interested in acquiring more of them, but I don't know whether that is a practical option right now.
Well, I guess to build off Chris's point, and then Bob will go to you. We have Trinity Cemetery Association that has Trinity Cemetery and Mountain Meadows. I mean, could we act as, I guess, a conduit to transfer Union Cemetery to that association, including the assets, and have it all managed by them?
We could, or perhaps we can reach out to them and see if they want to make a direct, introduce them to the Union Cemetery Association and see if they want to make a direct transaction with this cemetery association and skip the ownership of the town totally.
Okay. Bob, go ahead.
If you want to authorize this, we could proceed and report back at the next meeting. We can proceed with the options of both seeing if there's another cemetery who may want to acquire this association with its assets, trust fund, and liabilities directly, or we'll do some due diligence whether if the town assumes this and takes title to this and acquires it, what are its responsibilities? What are the numbers?
Yeah, my first question was headed towards whether another cemetery association would take it over. But my second question is, if we do not purchase it, what are the potential next steps for them? What could they do, and what would happen?
They could sell, they can have someone else acquire the cemetery, or if they do not maintain it, and there's a statute that says if lots have not been maintained during the previous 10 years, or no lots have been sold in the previous 40 years, there is a provision for the town to take over a cemetery. So if there is a truly abandoned cemetery, the town can take it over. There's not a lot they can do other than abandon the cemetery, I suppose, and walk from the cemetery when they're out of money. And then years later, the town will have to come in and may want to come in and acquire it that way.
And do you believe there's any other reason why they may not have already reached out to another cemetery association?
I don't. I've never had any
Okay.
conversations with them
Okay.
as to what they've done.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a reason, like they're falling back to us because they've already taken a lot of steps. I'm just curious if that's the situation or not.
I'm not sure, but I would suppose that since the town is the largest plot holder, that may be why they approached the town and taking this over.
Okay, thank you.
Bob, I think this was always the plan or the intention of the association, was that when they could not run it anymore, that they would turn it over to the town. Because I've heard, this conversation has been had before. They just were not ready. This is the first time that they've actually taken this very proactive step of turning it over. But this is something that I've known for a while.
Yeah, it makes more sense to fall under a cemetery association who has done this before and has the repeatability on this versus the town taking it over.
Okay, so we'll go Rob, Chris, and then Al.
Really quick, do we know how many plots are left for that land?
Specifically, no. It's not a lot, but I know they do have spaces. They had talked about putting up some of the niche things for cremains and things like that. But again, that's going to take a little bit of an initial investment if the town wanted to do that. Chris. You're on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
If we were to move forward with looking into our options, could we authorize one but not the other? What I mean by that is, could we authorize you to try to get to another cemetery organization, but deny the option of taking it on ourselves?
Well, sure. At
Brian,
this point, I would not ask that you authorize us to go ahead with this purchase and the acquisition by the town. I would suggest that you tell us, and I think I understand what you'd want to do. We can reach out to another cemetery and at the same time reach out to this Union Cemetery and ask them a few questions. It's a limited due diligence just to get some more background for you folks as to where they are, what they have, etc.
Right. I think my number one concern here is that we are not in the cemetery business and should not be considering taking this on.
Okay, Bruno.
Yeah, I just had more of a comment, just so folks have an idea, just doing the quick math, that trust will run out of money in a little over 7 years. So then the town will be shelling out the full $7,000 yearly expenses. So that's something to think about in the future, taking on that kind of obligation for the community and weighing it against, what the benefit of the community, would be for the town. So just wanted to throw that out there. Just trying to get my head around it, thinking about the numbers.
Well, that's for a private landscaper to come in and maintain that. We could obviously do that substantially cheaper because we could
Okay.
have Public Works fit that into their regular mowing schedule.
Sure, they're gonna love that. Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, that is not an easy job to
No,
do
it's not.
because you're just not straight back and forth.
That's
You're
right.
zigzagging around stones and
Right.
things like that. So, so why don't we do this? I'll reach out to the Trinity Cemetery Association and kind of take their temperature to see if that might be something they're interested in. In the meantime, Brian, why don't you do a little research on some of the questions that we had? And then this will be placed on the agenda for October 20th. And at that point, there'll be a presentation on the different options, and then you can decide what the best course of action would be. So we'll just use the next 2 weeks just for research. If you think of any additional questions, anything pops into your mind over the next couple of days, get those over to us and we will make sure that they get to Brian so he can continue the research. Bob Finley, go ahead.
Yeah, that would also include like because we're saying maintenance by whatever their standards are. I mean, I haven't been by there in a while that I've looked at it. And is there any other upkeep besides the maintenance that we'd have to consider? And then the year-on-year escalation on that becomes something you have to factor in on what it could cost us. So.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is it's not plowed in the winter because that cemetery is not open. So there's no plowing concerns there. The driveways themselves are eventually going to need to be redone. So there could be some asphalt work to your point.
Yeah,
there,
I was going to
so.
say the total maintenance over time.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
We'll
correct.
look into all that.
We'll get that information.
Yep.
Thank
So anybody else on that one? Nope. Okay, good. All right, we'll move on to item number 7. Discussion, take possible action regarding non-union employee pay plan. Now, as you know, we have several non-union employees. A few months ago, our HR director, Chris Pelosi, put together a little a pay study for the non-union employees. I took some of the feedback from you guys over the last 2 meetings when we were talking about different contracts for these folks, and asked Chris to kind of build off of the package that he put in front of you to put together some type of structure for contracts as to how they might look going forward. So for the next set of senior staff, let's say that we hire, we would have a uniform approach to that. We would have a uniform contract, a uniform evaluation process. So Chris put a lot of information together, which you received in your packets. I'm going to have him do a quick presentation on all this, give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. But again, no actions will be taken tonight. This is more just kind of digest everything. And then October 20th, and then the first meeting in November, if these are things that you're interested in, then we can start to move forward and put pieces in place. So with that, Chris, I'll turn this over to you. Warren Holcomb is also here, our labor attorney. So if there are any specific legal questions as well, Warren can jump in and answer those. So Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Great, thanks, Kirk. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Great. So I'll start by just giving you some background and breaking down what this portion of tonight's packet consists of. You've got the original pay plan outline that we discussed back in April during quarantine. And the goal in creating that was twofold. It was to provide the board with an alternative compensation strategy for its professional staff that links pay and performance. And it was also put together to address the town's strategic plan initiative to develop, implement, and document standardized recruitment practices that will enable us to recruit and retain qualified, skilled professionals. So the plan itself, as Kurt's already said, would cover non-union appointed and elected officials, and it would aim to accomplish the objectives that you see in Section B of the introduction: internal equity, competitive with the municipal market, link pay and performance. It should be easy to administer, and it should provide continuity and flexibility. So we put together a salary study where we used Connecticut Conference of Municipalities data, and we identified a population range of 16,000. We looked at towns ranging from 14 to 18,000 in population as the basis for which towns we would look at in the study. And then we compared job descriptions from those municipalities to ensure that we're comparing job descriptions that have an equal level of responsibility, similar duties and functions. And then from there, we took a mean salary from the CCM data, and we used a 30% spread to establish the minimum and maximum. And then we used the mean, obviously, as the midpoint of that. The rest of that first 2 pages or so of the packet really just gets into the specifics of how the plan would be administered and maintained. The second document that you guys have tonight is the performance evaluations packet, and that is basically a guide. We started talking at the end of the last meeting about how performance evaluations would tie into a plan like this. A credible and fair pay for performance compensation system is going to require an effective performance evaluation system, as well as supervisors who are able and willing to use it properly. So to help in understanding how the evaluation process will work, I put together this guide that I hope will simplify the process and prevent these evaluations from turning into meaningless practice in the future. So the first step in the evaluation process is going to be to develop these objectives at the beginning of the evaluation period. And if we look at the packet, there's 3 types of objectives that we're going to get into and establish when we meet with our supervisors. And those are the general objectives, problem solving, and innovative objectives. So the general objectives are those which are concerned with fulfilling normal duties, what the supervisor expects from employees on a day in, day out basis. The problem solving objectives are those where maybe our employees or we as supervisors can identify deficiencies within the department's procedures and attempt to correct it or perhaps make it better. And then the innovative objectives are those where we would require the creation of a procedure or process that addresses a new function of the department. So an example of that might be the computerization of assessment records as compared to maintaining it manually, or like with our time and attendance system going from a paper to an electronic process. So really, beginning of the evaluation period, we're setting objectives throughout the course of the year. We aim to meet those objectives. We have an interim evaluation, a final evaluation. We have to assign weights to how these objectives are going to be scored. And finally, at the end of all of this, we have in the back of the packet, you've got a pay matrix. And based on the targets that we've hit or not hit throughout the course of the year, we assign a percentage increase to whatever our rating is going to be. And this is just an example. One thing I'd like to point out, we have the 4 categories of the rating system. And right now they do not match with what I have in the guide. There's an extra step. So we have unacceptable, needs improvement, meet expectations, exceeds expectations, and then superior. The pay matrix doesn't include that, but essentially we would have a pay matrix where, you know, an unacceptable might represent a 0% increase, and then maybe the same for needs improvement. And then as we get to, you know, satisfactory or meets expectations, we're at a 1%. If we're exceeding expectations, we're at a 2. And if we're going above and beyond, and we've hit every marker throughout the course of the year, and we have, you know, 4s and 5s for all of our general objectives, maybe this person's performing at a superior level, and they deserve a 3% increase on the year. So that really is how you take the evaluation system that previously existed that had no direct effect on compensation, and you tie it in so that it links your pay and performance with your professional level staff. It's a pretty basic idea. The reason the guide is so big is because it'll be kind of a new process. I know we've had performance evaluations in the past, but I think we can all agree that sometimes, more often than not, these things turn into a mundane exercise. It doesn't really add a significant level of value, and certainly we want to prevent this from turning into something like that. And so that's really the quick breakdown of what the performance evaluation looks like. You have some other materials as far as, you know, what the evaluation form would look like, and then we also have some forms for setting objectives with our supervisors. But really the key takeaway in all of this is we set objectives at the beginning of the fiscal year. We have an interim evaluation, a final evaluation, and based on the results or the number of objectives that we accomplish throughout the year, we assign weights and a rating scale 1 through 5, and that is tied into the pay matrix that represents 0 to 3% increases rather than you know, these professional level staff just getting the inherent 2.49% or whatever it is on an annual basis. So these are just thoughts on how we might go about moving to a compensation strategy that I think the board wanted to see. And with that, I'll entertain any questions on any of that material.
Does anybody have any specific questions at this point? Again, this is something that we've kind of talked about in general, and it's also a part of the strategic plan. So we wanted to go ahead and get that going. All right, Bob Finley, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just 2 things. This is very good. Is there any governance on the ratings? So you have the manager who does the actual review. Will there be an oversight over the manager? So it's more multi-person review of the ratings? That could be,
I think that we
human
would.
resources, that could be the first selectman, whatever that would be. But is there more of a governance?
Right. So I think that highly depends on what position we're talking about. Certainly, if this is something that we consider using in our supervisor's union contract, then there are definitely positions in there where I could certainly oversee the process with the directors and walk them through to make sure that they're adhering to the guide and that this isn't a subjective process. But for the positions that we're talking about, which are at least tonight anyways, the non-union positions, the oversight there would really be, you know, these professional level staff members in conjunction with the first selectman. And then as to the oversight that you're referring to, that would really come from other board members. The other board members would have
Okay.
an opportunity to look at that as well.
Yeah, and then my other follow-up question, if there, and God forbid there is one, but if there is an unacceptable rating, is it tied to a performance improvement plan or something like that? Where if you are going to give that rating out, there should be something tied to that.
Sure. So I think that definitely would depend on, what areas are we deficient in? What type of issues are we looking at? Did we blow a deadline on a project throughout the course of the year? Did we, is it an attendance problem? But certainly where it makes sense, there would be, it wouldn't just be left, obviously, with the unsatisfactory or needs improvement, and then we would just ignore it. The evaluation at the end, the real value in doing the evaluation at the end of the whole process is to, give me 1 second here and get my, right. So the way I see it, the value and the improvement, whether you need to put someone on performance improvement versus just having the conversation with the person at the end of the rating period, we would have to determine whether that conversation at the end of the rating period with the employee is enough to get them on the right track, or whether we need to pursue something more concrete in the form of a performance improvement plan, like you're,
right. My reason for that is if you did a mid-year with somebody and you put them on a performance improvement plan and they improved, then you can take their rating up at the end of year, and,
sure.
and then it benefits them in their salary, right? So that's kind of my thoughts. So they have a
Right.
chance, right? So okay.
Right. Yeah. You're correct. The whole idea of the interim evaluation is to give them some guidance and direction on where they're doing great and maybe where they need to improve on things in order to meet the objectives and the end goal at the end of the fiscal year.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
No problem.
Okay, any other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, so we'll let everybody digest this a little bit more. And then we will look to put this on an agenda, whether it be next meeting, the meeting thereafter, to give you an opportunity to discuss it a little bit more in depth. Not necessarily a huge rush at this point, because again, we already have folks in these positions with contracts. But I don't think any of them would be against adding some of the parts that are in here going forward, particularly with incentivizing performance and things like that. And we'll get into a little bit of that during executive session, some of the conversations I've had with them. But I think it makes a lot of sense that we move forward with this as a town, just to put a little bit more organization because of the importance of these senior staff level positions. We want to make sure that we are able to recruit the best possible people that we can to fill these roles. I think folks at this level are used to a certain standard when it comes to interviewing and contracts and things like that. So I think it'd be great if we're able to match and meet the expectations that these folks have. So if there's no last questions for Chris, no, we'll thank Chris. Thank you for putting this all together. Rob, you have a question? Rob is saying thank you, even though he's on mute. And he's saying goodbye. Chris is waving goodbye. Anne Marie's waving goodbye. Bob Finley gave a thumbs up. That is high praise, Chris Pelosi, from Bob Finley. I'll have you know, he doesn't give those out lightly. So, all right. So with that, we will move on to item number 8, which is discussion, take possible action regarding the capital plan. All right. At our last meeting, I introduced to you the capital plan. And again, because of COVID and a few other things going on, this is a little bit of a different plan than we had initially put together back in December with the senior staff. We've had to make some strategic decisions. And as I explained, some of the things that we had projected to be paid out over 2 or 3 years, Doug Thomas has been able to actually have those all paid up, and they'll have a surplus in this line. So we decided to address a few very specific concerns that we had. So again, I think I went through everything in the last meeting, so I don't want to bore everyone and go back through them again. But are there any specific questions on the 2020, 2021 forecasted capital plan? Everyone is comfortable? Okay. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to approve the long-term capital plan forecast for fiscal year 2021. Could I have a motion to do so? Motion by Chris, second by Anne Marie. Is there any discussion? Anne Marie, you're on mute. Still on mute. She's okay? Are you trying to talk to us, Anne Marie? No? Okay. All right, so no other comments, questions? Okay, all in favor? Everybody raised their hand. Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you very much, everyone. All right, item number 9 is executive session. We're going to go into executive session to discuss contract negotiations for 3 things. The police union contract, the HR director contract, the operations director contract, and the finance director's contract. We are going to invite into executive session town councils Brian Leclerc and Warren Holcomb, as well as Chief of Staff Rory Burke, at least initially. And then we will excuse Rory for the parts that he is not necessary for. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session at 7:36 p.m. Motion by Chris, second by Bob Finley. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? The chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. So Roy, if you can put everybody else in the waiting room.